When I walked into my room and saw that the money I had been saving for months was gone, my stomach dropped. I checked the drawer again, hoping I was wrong, but the envelope was empty. Every dollar I worked for had vanished. I didn't need to guess who had taken it. My sister, Lila, had never been able to keep her hands off things that weren't hers. A few hours later, she admitted it casually, almost with pride, saying she spent it on clothes and a weekend away with her friends. She waited for me to shout, to cry, to beg for her to give it back. Instead, I smiled. She thought she had broken me, but she had no idea what was coming. My name is Evan, and I've always been the quiet one in the family. My parents, Doris and Marvin, worked hard to give us a decent life, but it wasn't easy. Dad spent long hours fixing cars at a local garage, and Mom balanced 2 part-time jobs to help pay the bills. I picked up shifts at a diner after school, bussing tables and washing dishes, saving every tip in that envelope. It wasn't just cash, it was a piece of freedom, something I built with my own hands. Lila, on the other hand, never cared about earning anything. She was younger but always acted like the world owed her. If she wanted something, she took it, and if she got caught, she pouted until our parents let it go. They never saw her the way I did. To them, she was just a little careless. To me, she was selfish, reckless, and dangerous in ways they refused to notice. I had planned to use that money for something meaningful. Maybe a road trip with friends before college started. Maybe to cover my deposit so I could finally leave this town. Every dollar was supposed to move me closer to that goal. Watching Lila blow it all away on things she didn't even need felt like a punch in the gut. But as I stood there, listening to her laugh about how it wasn't a big deal, something inside me changed. I didn't argue with her. I didn't run to my parents because I knew they would brush it aside like always. I just kept that small smile on my face. She thought she had won. She thought I was weak. She didn't realize that she had just given me the reason I needed to finally stop letting her walk all over me. Growing up with Lila was never easy. From the time we were kids, it was clear she moved through life differently than I did. While I focused on finishing homework, helping Mom around the house, or saving my allowance for something I really wanted, she chased whatever caught her eye in the moment. Toys, candy, small treats. Nothing was ever enough. And if it wasn't hers, she'd find a way to take it or manipulate someone into giving it to her. At first, I tried to tell myself it was just childhood behavior, that maybe she would grow out of it. But as the years passed, the pattern never changed. It only grew bolder. Our parents, Doris and Marvin, loved her fiercely, and I never doubted that, but they had a habit of shielding her from consequences. If she lied or skipped chores, they let it slide with a laugh or a mild scolding. When she got upset or cried about something, they rushed to soothe her, often forgetting that I had been responsible for keeping the house in order or finishing what she had ignored. Their indulgence became a kind of armor for Lila, letting her act recklessly without ever really learning the weight of her actions. I could see it in her eyes. Even as a child, she thought rules didn't apply to her. And unfortunately, for years, she proved herself right. Despite all this, I tried to be patient. I knew my role in the family wasn't glamorous, but it was necessary. I took responsibility for things she ignored, cleaned up after her messes, and even covered for her mistakes at school when she got into trouble. Sometimes it meant missing out on fun with friends or skipping something I wanted for myself. I didn't resent her for it openly. After all, she was my sister, but I carried a quiet frustration that grew every year. Every time I bent over backward to fix a problem she caused, it became harder to pretend her behavior didn't hurt me. The betrayals started small but frequent. Borrowed money never returned, promises broken, things she claimed she would do for me but never followed through on. Each time it stung, but I let it go because I didn't want conflict. My parents usually brushed it off too, saying, "She's young," or "She didn't mean it." But I started noticing a pattern. These weren't accidents or lapses. They were choices she made, knowing someone else would clean up after her. And yet, every indulgence reinforced her sense of entitlement. The more she got away with, the bolder she became. Over time, I began to realize something uncomfortable. Her behavior wasn't just reckless, it was deliberate. She understood that she could bend people to her will, and she used it like a weapon. I had spent my whole life being responsible, sacrificing for the family, and quietly watching her take what she wanted without consequence. It wasn't fair, and deep down, I knew that fairness alone would never change her. If anything, patience had only strengthened. By the time I discovered the money missing, all those years of subtle betrayals, careless actions, and ignored responsibilities clicked together. Lila wasn't just thoughtless. She was selfish to the core. But instead of letting anger or despair take over, I realized something important. I could no longer let her actions dictate my life. I could choose how I responded, and that choice would shape everything that came next. I had been careful with that money for months. Every tip I earned at the diner, every extra dollar from odd jobs, I tucked away in a small envelope and hid in the back of my drawer. It wasn't just cash. It was a promise to myself, a piece of freedom I had worked hard to earn. I rarely spent anything on myself, always thinking about what that money could mean in the future. I checked it regularly, counting every bill and coin, making sure nothing was missing. For months, everything was perfect. Until that afternoon. I opened the drawer and froze. The envelope I had been guarding so carefully was gone. Not just some bills, not just coins, everything. My stomach turned over. I rifled through the drawer, hoping I had put it somewhere else, but the spot where it always sat was empty. Panic started to rise in my chest, but I forced myself to breathe. Someone had taken it. I didn't have to look far. Lila appeared in the doorway, leaning casually against the frame, a smug smile on her face. "Oh, that," she said, almost too lightly, as if it were nothing. "I borrowed it. I needed some cash, so I spent it." My hands tightened into fists, but I stayed still, listening. She rattled off the details: clothes she had wanted, makeup she had been saving up for, and a weekend trip with friends she hadn't bothered to ask about. She spoke as if it were normal, as if she had done nothing wrong. She expected me to cry, to yell, to beg her to return it. She expected a reaction she could enjoy, a chance to feel powerful. I stared at her for a long moment, feeling the weight of everything I had done to earn that money and how easily she had erased it. Then, surprisingly, I smiled. Not the kind of smile that shows happiness, but one that hides something deeper, something she couldn't understand. She blinked, confused, clearly expecting the tears or the anger she was used to seeing. That smile unnerved her. It wasn't weakness. It wasn't surrender. It was calm, calculated, and quiet, but it carried a message she didn't hear aloud. She had just made a mistake. When I told my parents, hoping they might finally step in, they shrugged. "It's just money. Kids fight over money sometime." "Let it go," Dad said. Mom nodded silently, looking at Lila as if to remind me that she was still their little girl. The injustice of it hit me like a slap. All the months of work, the patience, the sacrifices, they didn't matter. To them, it was just a small sibling fight, a problem too trivial to address. Lila, of course, smirked, satisfied that she had once again slipped past any real consequence. But I wasn't upset in the way they thought I would be. I wasn't crying or pleading. That calm smile on my face was the beginning of something else, a quiet reckoning they could not see yet. Lila had assumed she had won, but the truth was she had only given me the clarity I needed. For the first time, I understood that patience, planning, and timing mattered more than anger. She had underestimated me, and that was the mistake she would soon regret. The moment Lila admitted she had spent my money, a heavy weight settled in my chest. It wasn't just about the cash. That money was my independence, my freedom, and a symbol of all the effort I had poured into something that mattered to me. Every late night at the diner, every extra shift I picked up while my friends hung out or slept in, had built this small sense of control over my life. It was my way of proving that I could take care of myself, that I could earn something on my own. And she had destroyed it with a careless laugh. I remembered the countless nights wiping tables and folding napkins under the harsh fluorescent lights, watching the clock and dreaming about the future I was trying to build. I thought about how I had saved every tip, counting each dollar, carefully hiding it away, believing that one day it would open a door to something bigger. And now, in one thoughtless act, Lila had thrown all of that away. It was more than theft. It was a betrayal that cut deeper than I expected. She watched me with that smug grin, waiting for the tears, the pleading, the display of hurt she had grown used to. She thought she had me where she wanted, thinking my reaction would confirm her superiority. But instead of anger or sorrow, I offered her a quiet smile. It wasn't a smile of happiness or relief. It was controlled, steady, and unyielding. I let her see a hint of calm that she couldn't break, a small reflection of the strength she had tried to undermine. I wanted her to know that her actions hadn't defeated me, even if it looked that way on the surface. In that moment, I realized something important. I had been letting her behavior dictate my feelings for too long. All the past betrayals, the lies, the little manipulations I had forgiven or ignored, they had built a pattern where she believed she could take what she wanted without consequence. But this time, it would be different. This time, I would not let her control the outcome. This time, I would take back the power she had stolen from me, not with anger, but with action. The betrayal hit me hard because it was personal. Lila had crossed a line that went beyond the normal sibling arguments or petty fights. She had violated my trust, disregarded my effort, and mocked the value I placed on my own. And yet, beneath the sting of betrayal, a clear thought formed in my mind. This would be the last time she humiliated. I would no longer be the one who endured the consequences of her selfishness quietly. I would find a way to balance the scales, to make her see that her actions had limits, and that I was no longer someone to underestimate. I kept my smile as she continued to talk, oblivious to the shift happening inside me. The hurt remained, but it was no longer the guiding force. It had transformed into determination. Lila had assumed she had broken me, but in reality, she had ignited something far stronger, a resolve to reclaim what was mine and to ensure that she could never treat me so carelessly again. After that day, I started paying close attention to Lila, more than I ever had before. At first, I told myself I was just noticing patterns, but really I was studying her. Every move, every word, every little habit became important. I watched how she carried herself when she thought no one was looking, how she talked to friends, how she handled her chores, or rather, how she avoided them. I wanted to understand her fully, to see where she slipped, where she was careless, and where she could be caught. It didn't take long to notice the little lies she told. She would tell Mom she had finished homework when she hadn't, or claim she was at a friend's house when she was out sneaking into town. Even when Dad asked simple questions about her day, she had excuses ready, practiced, and smooth. These lies were small, harmless seeming on the surface, but over time, they built a clear picture of someone used to bending the truth without facing real consequence. She trusted that everyone would forgive or overlook her mistakes. That trust would be her weakness. I realized quickly that I didn't want revenge through anger or confrontation. I didn't want shouting matches, crying, or fighting. That would be too obvious, too easy for her to shrug off. I needed something quiet, precise, and effective. I needed a way to show her, without my parents thinking I was overreacting, that her actions had limits and that she could not get away with everything. That required patience, careful observation, and planning. I started keeping notes, not on paper, but in my mind at first. Every time she skipped school, lied about money, or snuck out, I remembered it. I paid attention to when she lied about what she spent, who she hung out with, and what she promised she would do but didn't. Each small detail added up. I could see patterns, routines, and weaknesses forming a clear path. If I used them correctly, I could build a way to make her face consequences she couldn't escape. What surprised me was how little effort it took to gather information. Lila was careless when she thought no one was paying attention. She left receipts in obvious places, bragged to friends about small misdeeds, and underestimated how much I noticed. Every small action she took to make herself look clever or hide her mistakes only gave me more ammunition. It became almost like a game, except the stakes were higher than anything she realized. By the end of a few weeks, I felt a strange sense of control. I wasn't powerless anymore, even though she had taken my money and my trust. I had a plan forming, a way to make sure she learned that her behavior had real consequences. I didn't need to confront her directly yet. I only needed patience, timing, and precision. I could see clearly that she would never see it coming, and that thought made the plan even more satisfying. I knew one thing for certain. Her confidence in getting away with everything was going to be her undoing, and I was ready to make sure of it. I knew I had to be patient if I wanted real results. It wasn't enough to be angry, or even to catch her once. I needed a situation where her actions couldn't be denied, something that would leave no room for excuses. I thought about the ways she had taken advantage of me before and realized I could use the same tactics she relied on against her. If she could see an opportunity and take it without thinking twice, I could create one on purpose. And this time, it would work in my favor. I left a small amount of cash on my desk, carefully visible but not obvious. Just enough for her to notice it, just enough to tempt her. I watched from the doorway, pretending to be busy with homework, feeling my pulse speed with anticipation. It didn't take long. Lila wandered in, eyes lighting up when she saw the money. She grinned to herself, thinking she was clever, thinking she was getting away with something again. Without hesitation, she picked it up, muttering under her breath about needing it for some weekend plans with her friends. I stayed still, keeping my expression calm, as though I hadn't noticed anything. What Lila didn't know was that I had been keeping records for weeks. Hidden receipts from past purchases, notes about the times she lied about her spending, and small inconsistencies in the stories she told everyone were all lined up and ready. She had no idea that I had proof of everything she had done, proof that couldn't be brushed off as a sibling mistake or a small lapse in judgment. Every lie she had told, every small theft, had been documented quietly, invisibly, like pieces of a puzzle. Once she left with the money, feeling victorious again, I began putting the pieces together. I didn't confront her immediately. I let her smugness settle, let her believe she had won yet again. That confidence would make her careless in the days to come. I went through my notes and receipts, making sure I had everything in order. This time, she wouldn't be able to laugh her way out of it. I had concrete proof, a trail that led straight back to her. The satisfaction didn't come from anger or revenge itself, but from the clarity that this plan would work. I wasn't acting impulsively or out of spite. I had created a system where her actions would expose her, where her own carelessness would trap her. She had always thought she was smarter than everyone, that no one noticed her patterns. Now the tables had turned. She had walked right into a situation that she couldn't manipulate or excuse. I waited, observing her from a distance, knowing that her next move would reveal everything. She had underestimated me completely, thinking I was still the same quiet, passive brother she had always mocked. But I had learned from every mistake, every betrayal, and every moment of being overlooked. This time, I had control, and the truth would finally come to light in a way she could not deny. After watching Lila take the bait money, I knew it was time. I had been patient, gathering proof quietly, and now I had everything I needed. I didn't storm into my parents' room screaming or demanding justice. That wouldn't have worked. I approached them calmly, carrying the receipts, notes, and records I had collected over weeks. I wanted them to see the truth, not just hear accusations. "Mom, Dad," I began, keeping my voice steady. "I need you to see something." I laid out everything clearly. The small amounts of money Lila had taken, the lies she told about school and chores, the receipts that showed she spent money she claimed she didn't have, and the times she had skipped responsibilities. I didn't add extra emotion or commentary. I let the evidence speak for itself. At first, they looked confused, trying to process what I was showing them. Mom frowned, scanning the receipts, while Dad ran his hand through his hair, shaking his head in disbelief. "I thought she was just careless," Mom murmured, almost to herself. I didn't realize it was this deliberate. Dad stayed quiet for a long moment, his eyes on me as he took in the full picture. The realization hit them slowly but surely. This wasn't small mistakes or teenage carelessness. It was consistent, intentional behavior. I explained each example calmly, pointing out the patterns I had documented. How she lied about her spending, how she skipped school or exaggerated responsibilities, and how she repeatedly took advantage of situations without remorse. I showed them how she had stolen my money and thought it was nothing, how she expected me to react in ways that gave her control. I could see the shock in their eyes, mixed with guilt and disbelief. For years, they had seen Lila as their little girl who made mistakes. They had defended her, excused her behavior, and even scolded me for being too strict or serious. Now, with all the evidence in front of them, the truth was undeniable. Doris and Marvin began to understand that indulgence had created a pattern, that their kindness and forgiveness had allowed Lila to act without consequences. They realized she wasn't just careless. She had been manipulating situations and people to get what she wanted. I stayed calm throughout. I didn't need to argue or raise my voice because the proof was enough. I wanted them to fully understand, to see clearly how their actions, or inactions, had shaped her behavior. It was a moment of reckoning, not just for Lila, but for the entire family dynamic. Finally, my parents looked at me with a mix of pride and relief. Pride because I had handled this responsibly, and relief because someone in the family could finally see the truth clearly. For the first time, the balance shifted. Lila could no longer hide behind excuses or the protection of our parents. They understood her actions for what they really were, and in that understanding, I felt a quiet satisfaction. This was more than vindication. It was the beginning of real change. For the first time, she would face the consequences of her choices in a way that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. Once my parents realized the truth, everything changed. Lila walked into the living room expecting the usual reaction, maybe a small scolding, maybe Mom telling her to apologize, and then life moving on as if nothing happened. She looked around, confused, as Dad calmly explained that she would no longer be able to avoid responsibility for her actions. There would be no quick forgiveness, no brushed-off mistakes. This time, her choices had consequences. I watched quietly as they laid out the rules. Lila would have to pay me back for the money she had taken, not from my savings, but from her own allowance and the earnings from a part-time job they expected her to get. She tried to argue, tried to make excuses, but my parents were firm. For the first time, she realized that her usual tactics, pleading, pouting, or blaming others, wouldn't work. She had to face the results of her actions herself. It was strange to watch her struggle. She had always been so used to slipping past responsibility that every small task now felt like a mountain. Figuring out how to save from her allowance, working extra hours at a weekend job, keeping track of payments. It was unfamiliar and uncomfortable. She complained, argued, and sometimes cried, but she had no one to turn to. No one would fix this for her. She had underestimated what patience and careful planning could do. I didn't gloat, didn't make a show of victory. I didn't need to. Seeing her realize the weight of her own choices was enough. Every time she calculated how much she owed me, every time she counted coins from her hard-earned wages, I felt the quiet satisfaction of justice being served. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. There were no arguments or confrontations. It was simply her facing reality, the natural outcome of her behavior finally catching up with her. The change in her demeanor was subtle but undeniable. She had always been the one in control, the one who manipulated situations to her favor. Now, She was learning patience, accountability, and the discomfort of making up for mistakes on her own. Each day she worked, each dollar she set aside to pay me back, reinforced the lesson she had avoided for years. I could see frustration and regret building inside her, and I stayed silent, letting her experience it fully. The family dynamic shifted as well. My parents, who had previously protected her, now supported fairness instead of indulgence. They reminded her when she slipped, guided her when she struggled, but did not intervene to shield her from the consequences. Lila's world, once full of shortcuts and excuses, had become structured and accountable. In the end, my revenge wasn't about punishment for the sake of anger. It was about restoring balance and teaching a lesson she couldn't ignore. She had taken my hard-earned money and expected me to cry, to beg, or to accept it quietly. Instead, I had waited, planned, and allowed the natural consequences of her actions to unfold. Watching her navigate the reality she had caused herself was enough. Justice had been delivered quietly and effectively, without a single harsh word from me. Once the reality of her situation sank in, Lila couldn't hold back her anger. She stormed through the house, yelling that I had ruined her life, and that it wasn't fair. She threw accusations, blaming me for everything that had gone wrong, as if I had orchestrated her problems rather than simply holding her accountable. Her voice echoed through the rooms, full of frustration and disbelief, but I stayed calm. I didn't respond with words or arguments. I let her vent, knowing that her outburst was more about her own guilt and fear than about me. For years, my parents had often taken her side, letting her slip by, excusing her mistakes, and overlooking the ways she hurt me. This time, however, they finally saw the truth clearly. They recognized that her anger wasn't justified, and that she had created her own consequences. Doris and Marvin supported me openly, explaining that fairness mattered more than favoritism, and that responsibility couldn't be avoided. Their acknowledgement felt strange at first, like a sudden shift in the balance of power in our home, but it was also a relief. Finally, someone in the family understood the situation as I had all along. Watching Lila lash out and seeing my parents side with me forced a new kind of reflection. I realized just how deep betrayal from someone you love can cut. It wasn't just the money or the lies or the broken trust. It was the sense of being unseen, of having my efforts ignored, and of realizing that the person who should have cared for me as much as I cared for them could hurt me so easily. Family betrayal is different from any other kind because it's personal, and it carries a weight that friends or strangers could never match. The pain is quiet but persistent, a shadow that lingers long after the moment has passed. Despite everything Lila had done, I didn't hate her. Hatred felt like wasted energy, and I knew that it wouldn't fix anything. She was still my sister, the person I grew up with, and in small moments, I remembered the good times, the shared laughter, and the simple bond we had once had. Those memories made the betrayal harder to process, but they also reminded me why it mattered that I acted with calm and purpose rather than anger. What I did know was that trust, once broken, cannot be rebuilt easily. Lila had shown her true colors over and over, and while consequences could teach her lessons, they couldn't erase the past. I would always be cautious with her, always aware that she could hurt me again if I let my guard down. It wasn't about resentment or revenge anymore. It was about protecting myself and understanding that family connections sometimes carry risks that friendships do not. In the quiet that followed her tantrums, I reflected on everything that had happened. I felt a mixture of relief, sorrow, and clarity. Lila had learned some lessons the hard way. My parents had finally recognized the truth, and I had preserved my dignity while reclaiming what was mine. The house was calm again, but the experience left a permanent mark. I understood now that betrayal could come from the closest people, and that sometimes the best response isn't anger. It's careful observation, measured action, and the knowledge that trust, once broken, changes everything. Looking back, I realized how everything had unfolded like a quiet storm. Lila had thought she had power over me, that she could take what I worked for and watch me break. She expected tears, anger, maybe even a fight. But when I smiled instead, it wasn't because I was happy. It was because I understood something she never had to face before. Every selfish action, every lie, every betrayal she had committed became a thread she couldn't escape. The rope she had used to manipulate others, to get what she wanted, had tied itself around her. She was now entangled in her own choices. Revenge, I learned, didn't need to be loud. It didn't require shouting, public humiliation, or displays of anger. It could be quiet, deliberate, and patient. Each step I took, each observation, each note I had kept in silence built a chain of accountability that she couldn't avoid. The satisfaction came not from seeing her suffer openly, but from knowing that the balance had shifted. She had thought she controlled the story, but in the end, I had guided the outcome without anyone realizing it at first. There was a strange clarity in the aftermath. The money was returned, partially through her own work, and the lessons she had to learn were undeniable. My parents had finally seen her actions for what they were and could no longer excuse her behavior. Lila had to face the consequences of her recklessness directly, and for the first time, she struggled without an easy escape. It wasn't about punishment for me, it was about fairness, about restoring order that had been absent for too long. Yet, even with justice served, the trust that once existed between us was gone. Lila was my sister, and that connection remained, but I knew it could never be the same. I could still care for her in small ways, but the sense of safety and certainty I had once taken for granted had vanished. She had shown me who she really was, and that knowledge stayed with me. The family dynamic had changed, and I had changed with it. Patience, observation, and measured action had taught me more than anger ever could. As I reflected on everything, I understood that some lessons are learned the hard way, and some betrayals are too deep to forget. The experience shaped how I viewed responsibility, trust, and human behavior. I saw that justice doesn't always need a dramatic scene to be effective. It can be slow, quiet, and invisible until it's complete. In that quiet, I found a strange satisfaction, a sense of closure that didn't rely on shouting or proving dominance. When I think about that day Lila took my money, I still remember the smile I gave her. Not out of joy, but out of realization. Her actions had set the stage for her own reckoning. I didn't need to chase revenge with fury. I only needed patience, attention, and calm. That smile carried everything I had learned, that consequences, carefully applied, are stronger than anger, and that even when justice is served, trust, once broken, is never fully restored.